The comedians, so-called, these nasty people, they're the court gestures of the statist movement of progressivism. That's what they are. We really shouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to them. The late-night people, Samantha Bee, who nobody even heard of before, these are court gestures. They're of absolutely no relevance whatsoever. And so it's important to understand the big picture. So we don't get sucked up into this too. These statists, progressives, they insist that they are the ones who are altruistic, and they are the ones who are noble, and that their ideas are humane, their ideas are compassionate. And therefore, if you oppose bigger government, more centralized government, if you dare to exercise your free will and accumulate private property, and if you are of all things successful in this unjust nation founded on the backs of slaves, then you can't possibly be a moral or ethical person. You just can't. And this is especially the case with white people, because of this privilege that you had and have. Now, despite the fact that the vast majority of people in this country come from immigrants, that's of no consequence. You see, this is all about groupthink and tribalism and group identification and symbolism. Race, age, class are to be used in order to define justice, equality, and freedom. Not the fact of individual justice, individual equality, individual freedom. None of that matters. Which is why you find extremely wealthy individuals, whether they're in sports, whether they're in broadcasting, whether they're in power, wherever they are, lamenting the injustices and inequalities of this country. Because they identify with a group or an ethnic or ideological or religious tribe. Group identification. And of course, we non-statists, we can't possibly understand any of this. We're throwbacks. We're Neanderthals. We won't embrace modernity, the future. And so, this gives you the context to understand a lot of things, I think. You know, in rediscovering Americanism, I talk about a number of things, a lot of things, but among them the administrative state. Because many of our fellow citizens have been conquered by the administrative state. They get a monthly or weekly check, which they now rely on. And this was always to be the case. This massive government administrative state, an army of bureaucrats, pushing out regulations, controlled by a little intellectual clique. And this intellectual clique, of course, is of the statist and progressive mindset. That is collectivism. And I point out in Rediscovering Americanism, there's not a seamless symmetry among and between the various American progressives and certain of the principal philosophers who influenced them. However, there certainly are significant similarities of outlook and attitude toward mankind, economics, law, politics, and government. There is a zealous belief and commitment in re-engineering both man's nature and his social environment toward egalitarian and utopian ends. There's an affinity for centralized rule, whether of the fascistic or socialistic kind, some hybrid thereof or some derivative thereof. For these reasons and others, the American progressive philosophers, intellectuals, and politicians uniformly disparage the principles of the American founding, the American civil society, and the American constitutional system. Whether idealistic whether idealistic historicism, material historicism, historic dialecticism, material dialecticism, synthesizing of opposites, actualizing individualism, conscious individualism, egalitarianism, the social sciences, the behavioral sciences, whatever they self-identify as, whatever their nomenclature is, the individual is swept up into and ultimately disfigured by a whirlwind of ideological concepts and impossibilities. And as the oppressiveness and impracticability of progressivism spreads, and more hard-line and belligerent become its proponents and enforcers, ultimately it leads to the unraveling of the civil society. And that's what you saw with Samantha Bee. That's what you see in the media today. That's what you see in the leadership of the Democrat Party today. That's what you see in many judges today who do not follow the rule of law. That's what you saw in Mr. Comey, Mr. Brennan, Mr. Clapper. The civil society, as Locke talked about it, predates the constitutional order. Its subjugation and transformation by a voracious and an unappeasable administrative state is the true object of the progressive ideologue. But the purpose of a constitution, or at least the American Constitution, is to secure politically the human harmony within the civil society so that individual liberty, equal justice, and the civil order may be nurtured and maintained. The difficulty is to bring order to liberty and liberty to order. And Madison talks about this in Federalist 51. The progressives are well aware that the Declaration and its governing expression, the Constitution, are enormous impediments to their purposes, inasmuch as the form of government that best reflects the values of the civil society and secures its existence is constitutional republicanism. Thus, as is now obvious, various doctrines of administrative state centralization have been developed and increasingly accepted, with the equivalent of Plato's guardians. That is, a select few of highly educated and specially trained governing elite oversee the operation of society. Progressives insist this is the normal evolution of government from a pioneering, revolutionary period to an increasingly complex and modern society. But despite the extensive writings about the supposed professional governing class with specialized expertise that will presumably bring not just order to chaos, but utopian-like perfection to humanity, it is fair to ask, who are these guardians? What makes them experts? Are they experts by specific technical training, or are they generalists? Are they experts by graduating from Ivy League schools? Are they experts by experience, knowledge, or judgment? Are they experts by training in the social and behavioral sciences or the physical sciences? Are they experts because they're more humane and compassionate than the citizenry over whom they rule? By what measures or standards are they experts? And who determines that these guardians are experts? Indeed, what makes them more expert, and all that may or may not entail, than those who operate in the private sector? Are the latter not the true experts by experience, training, and knowledge? Moreover, how are their supposed areas of expertise matched with their assignments to particular governmental departments and jobs to ensure the most efficient and effective performance? Are job placements based solely on expertise or other factors, including office politics? In fact, it's not the purpose of the civil service and public sector unionization and intervening policies such as seniority, affirmative action, tenure, etc., utterly unrelated to, or at least potentially contradictory of, a purely merit and expertise-based administrative system? So what do they mean by expertise that the rest of us don't have and achieve? Furthermore, which decisions are to be left to the private sector? Which decisions are better made in government field offices versus centralized offices? How can centrally located personnel know the conditions, problems, interests, and well-being of local communities, let alone local businesses and individuals? Is there such a thing as excessive centralization? And does it not result in delayed decision-making and decisions based on a lack of information and a lack of knowledge? And what is the overarching mission of the experts in the governing class? Is it to follow orders in a mechanical-like fashion? Or the broad discretion to formulate policies? Is it to administratively institute congressional legislation or to micromanage society? Is it to determine the general welfare, public good, and common destiny of the American people? What is it? And how does the voter and the political environment factor into administrative decision-making? Do the administrative state experts even attempt to discern the public will in particular or general matters when fashioning rules and regulations? Or do they deem their function as apolitical and therefore immune from any such considerations? Indeed, in their purpose, isn't their purpose to defy the electorate if they perceive the electorate defiant of their expertly determined policy goals? Is it not the case that at the end of every presidential term, the executive branch issues scores, if not hundreds, of so-called midnight regulations, the purpose of which is to enshrine certain policies of the outgoing administration after the voters have exercised their will and before the inauguration of the incoming executive? In fact, has not administrative rule substituted for self-governance? The issues surrounding the centralized administrative state are endless. The progressives and their philosopher kings, who have debated among themselves for decades and even centuries about the best forms of paradisiacal rule, that is utopianism, give scant coherent or practical direction. The fact is that the progressives are not more capable of organizing a complex society than a complex society is capable of being organized by anybody. But it doesn't matter, you see. Look at the disaster that Obamacare is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Now, why doesn't it matter? Because these people are altruistic, and they're more noble than the rest of us. That's why. It just doesn't matter. And they will continue to use race and inequality, tribalism and groupthink and group identity and symbolism, no matter how much power they get, no matter how centralized the government becomes, no matter how much liberty and property and unalienable rights you lose or under attack. Because the truth is, you get less freedom, less equality, less justice under statism, a.k.a. progressivism. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.